Now let's look at electrical test 9. Talking about some gauges and everything. In a bimetallic gauge, needle movement indicates varying amounts of current going through the circuit. You know what a bimetallic gauge is? Bimetal gauge, bimetal gauge. What is bimetal? What's the purpose of bimetal and what do we use it for? You ever seen any bimetal?
Two metal.
Yeah, it is two metal. That's a good word.
It sounds more like a short or a different name for an alloy, but it's not really. I mean, it's best.
That's not the one. There, that's a different test.
Yeah, but I can't find that one in there.
Yeah.
But I know I did it.
You can't.
No, I didn't, because it was really complicated.
Oh, okay. Okay, what you got with the bimetallic gauge is you have two pieces of metal. Let's imagine my hands are two pieces of metal. And they're two different kinds of metal. And they're married to one another. Really solid. They're not just glued together. They're actually fused. Okay? And so what you do is, when you heat them up, the one that expands the fastest is going to cause it to change shape. Alright? And then as it cools off, it goes the other way. Now you've got these turn signal flashers, the old kind of turn signal flashers that go ding, 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 like this one right here. They've got a little bimetal strip in them. And every time that little bimetal strip closes and current flows through to the lights, it causes the strip to change shape. But it opens and, you know, it's doing that constantly because of that. And that's making it flash. Alright, so in a bimetallic gauge, needle movement indicates varying amounts of current going to the circuit, and that is true. On some of the vehicles and I'm going to tell you something about bimetal gauges. You're not going to see a bimetal gauge on anything, I don't think on anything newer than about an 85 model or something like that, maybe. But because General Motors went to magnetic gauges in 72 or 71 or something, way yonder back a long time ago. I know that some of the Jeeps and stuff had bimetal gauges on them, and back in the early 80s, like some of them J-Series. And I will tell you that I took the instrument cluster one time. They got an instrument voltage regulator, and basically the way that works is it's just giving a little gentle little pulse of current to that gauge. If that instrument voltage regulator loses its ground and it stays shut and it's got straight voltage, all the gauges will go all the way to hot, and it'll burn the little windings out of them. And when I say windings, the way this little strip that's driving the needle is not. It doesn't have current flowing through it. It's actually just got a little pin on it, and it's hooked to the needle with a slot so that as it moves back and forth, the needle does. But what it's got is it's got a winding wrapped around it to heat it up. So the more current you send through that winding, the warmer it gets and the more it changes shape and drives your needle, you see. And the difference with those is if you short those two together, like on a gas gauge, on a bimetallic gas gauge, if you short the two wires together, it'll go all the way to full. But on the magnetic gas gauge, if you unplug it, it goes all the way past full. So it's the opposite the way you test it, you see. Even though on even magnetic fuel gauges, temperature gauges and stuff, if you short that one, it's going to go to hot. You short your oil pressure. You know, if it's a regular transducer, it's going to go all the way to high. But a gas gauge is kind of backwards to that. Okay, number 2, in a bimetallic gauge, the bimetal strip moves the needle by way of a magnetic field. Okay, that's a bunch of hooey. Not a magnetic field on a bimetallic gauge. It's actually a mechanical thing. What, have you done lost your test or what? What is it in there? Is that where it is? Okay. Oh, you're looking for a pin. Okay. An instrument voltage regulator delivers regulated voltage to the gauge circuit. It does. It's a little can. And you know what the little contacts on these instrument voltage regulators look like? It looks like a 9-volt battery. Alright. Okay, magnetic gauge uses balancing coils and magnetic fields to move the indicator. Alright, that's number 4, right? You got that? That's true. You understand how a magnetic gauge works? Anybody know? Can you do that?
I can guess at it.
Well, that's got a... I'm guessing it. Okay, we got 2 coils. We got a coil of wire running this way. Alright, we got a coil of wire running that way. Alright? And we got 3 terminals. We got a terminal there, terminal there. I need a different marker for that one. 3 different terminals. Alright. Now, whenever you got your power coming in here, you see you got 3 different things on that. Now one of these, and I always have to look this up and remember it, one of these is the one that goes to the sender unit, and one's power and one's ground. So it's got sender, power, and ground. Okay, the more of a ground the sender gets, the more it drives the needle. You know, in other words, if you got, if this was flowing through here and there wasn't much of a ground here, see what I mean? Then you're actually going to wind up with your magnetic field in such a way to where it's going to drive it over. The way they got it fixed, you know, it drives it all the way over here. All right, the more ground that you provide to it through your sending unit, wherever that, you know, however it's working, you're going to wind up causing the magnetic field to shift, and it's going to cause the needle to go somewhere else. That's why I like to say, if you disconnect the sending unit for the fuel pump on these new magnetic gauge fuel senders, if it's got one of those kind in it, then it's basically going to cause it to go past full. And if you short it to ground, it goes back over to empty. See? And so you just remember that if you're checking your fuel gauge. I want to know if the fuel gauge can sweep all the way. You know, can it sweep all the way? What if I unplug the fuel gauge, switch the key off, unplug the fuel gauge, turn it back on so it'll correct quickly because they got a slosh module circuit and all that junk in some of them, and it just goes about halfway and it stops with it unplugged. I know I got a bad gauge. Or if it's a Ford with a slosh module on it, which is this little circuit board right here that plugs into the instrument cluster on some of the older Fords. That thing right there could be bad and cause the gauge not to work either. And nowadays, when you buy a fuel gauge, it comes with one of them slosh modules. It was one of them kind that, you know, it'll have a little foam box and it'll have this stuck over on the side. So you're going to plug that little board in there, and you're also going to put the gauge in it. Now, the newer vehicles, and I don't even know if this test addresses it, I don't think it does. The newer vehicles have actually got the instrument cluster is a computer. I mean, the instrument cluster is actually a computer in and of itself. And so that it gets signals from the data bus and it drives the gauges to where they're supposed to go. That's why when you crank up a lot of these newer cars, I don't know if you've seen this, the gauges do a full sweep and then go back. That's basically a prove out. But those gauges are actually driven by the instrument cluster computer that's built into the cluster. All right, so in the magnetic gauge, the armature rotates in response to magnetic action. Would that be right? That's number 5. That is true. Sending units are used primarily in a system designed to warn of dangerously high temperatures. That's really false. Sending units are, huh?
That's pressure.
Yeah, well, you know, temperature, pressure, speed. I mean, there's all kinds of junk, you know, that you got in a gas fuel level. It's not just high temperatures. You know, the instrument voltage regulator maintains an average of 10 volts of current flow to the gauge circuit. You know, how are you supposed to know that's false? Usually it's about a 5 volts, and it's a blinking thing. One of the ways we used to check this on those old ones that had the instrument voltage regulator was we would unhook the sending unit, switch on the key, take our test light, hook it to the wire on the gauge, you know, that hooked to the gauge, and we ought to see a little blinking light, real weak blinking light. And also, our gauge ought to move in response to the ground it was getting through that test light, you see. So that was fairly simple to do. Gauges are not complicated. Okay, they're just not. There's a lot of other stuff that we have a lot more of a pain. You know, like that immobilizer stuff on that Volkswagen out there. And it puts the gauge to shame. But that's an instrument. That instrument cluster is a computer. You might notice that it's actually got all this information coming to it that it can report to you, like engine speed, temperature, oil temperature, and all kinds of stuff that it doesn't. It's not even displaying that stuff on there, although I guess it's got warning lights for it. The instrument voltage regulator is mounted either on or near the alternator. You know, wait a minute, I'm sorry. Let me back up. Number 8. A thermistor varies its resistance in relation to current changes. No. That's actually, or current surges, that's actually temperature. Thermistor, anytime you see therm. And then you got your instrument voltage regulator. It's going to be mounted on the back of the cluster. It's not going to be mounted out by the alternator. Now, some of these, with the magnetic gauges, these Ford cars, they don't have a true oil pressure transducer on them. They basically have just got a contact switch and a 22 ohm resistor. You know, we used to actually, we had initially in '87 when Ford came out with magnetic gauges on their pickup trucks, what we would have to do, that transducer didn't work all that well when it would give oddball readings. And so what they did was they had us to take that big old, you know, when I say the transducer for the oil sending unit, it would be this thing. It looks kind of like this, and it would have, you know, a place for your wrench, and then it would have some pipe threads here, which is a tapered thread that seals the tighter it gets. And then it looks like this, and on the top of it, it would have like a bolt, right? All right, they would have us to take that thing out, because it would actually have a variable resistor in here based on pressure. That's why they call it a transducer. All right, and then they'd have us to take it and just replace it with an oil sending unit that had them oddball shape to it and have the pipe threads on it. And they'd have that thing on top. And then in here, we would put a special little adapter that had the rubber end on it, and it would plug into the existing oil pressure wire, and this was 22 ohms. And that would, when you cranked it up, this contact switch would close, and it would drive that little thing to the middle. So sometimes when your oil pressure is acting crazy on one of those Fords, that means the contacts in this switch are getting dirty, and you can screw another one of the switches in there, and it'll be rock steady right in the middle. See, that's not really a true oil pressure gauge on those. It's basically, and they move the 22 ohm resistor to the back of the cluster. You may even see it on the circuit board now, and they just, the wire plugs directly into it. But that's something we had to add for a little recall program. Not really a recall, but a program that we did. What's the difference between a recall and a program? A program expires with date or mileage. A recall is forever, and they're required to do so many of those by the feds. Okay, when replacing an instrument voltage regulator or a gauge unit, the technician should always disconnect the negative battery cable foist. When replacing an instrument voltage regulator, yes, always a good idea whenever you're doing any of that kind of thing to disconnect the negative battery cable. Now, there's a caveat on that. If you're working on a Honda car, you better have the code for the radio. Because if you don't, the radio's going to say code, and they're not going to have no radio working on there. And so you can actually take a battery saver, it's got a little 9-volt battery in it, and plug it into the cigarette lighter. If it happens to be firing up some of the same circuits that drive the radio, that keeps the radio from losing its code. Now, you're supposed to have a sticker on the inside of the glove box that has that code in there. And they put these codes in the places. I don't know that, that came with the car, and it was supposed to be stuck in there because they know everybody's going to be unhooking their battery sooner or later. Well, you know what the problem with that is? The thief that stole the radio, all he's got to do is get that code out of the glove box. I guess if you lock the glove box, he may have trouble getting in there, but he ain't gonna have no problems about busting it or anything. Now, some of them older Crown Vickies and stuff that had this key button thing on the door, they would put a sticker on the trunk hinge with that code on it. So if Mama's over here with the trunk open, getting her groceries, they stopped doing that early on, like in the late '80s, early '90s. They would have a sticker with a 5-digit number stuck on the hood. The trunk hinge, up there. So when you had it up, there it was, just looking right at you. And somebody goes walking by, and they get a look at that. Boom, they're in your car. Well, they also had a problem with them gauges. Not gauges, but them things that people could just. And this one guy could do it just about every time. There's only 5 buttons there, so there's only so many codes you can have. And so he would punch and punch and punch and punch and punch and punch, and in a minute the doors would go whoop. And they found out that people were able to do that, and so they changed the programming in that module so that if somebody entered the wrong code 7 times, it would block them out for a certain amount of time. See, nobody could get in it even if they hit the right code unless it timed out. A fuel gauge is either bimetallic or magnetic. And when this was written, what do you think, guys? Was it bimetallic or magnetic? That's actually, they say that's true. That is not true. You can put true because that's going to be on the answer key. The instrument clusters that we have that get information like General Motors on the GMC we got out there, it's got a class 2 data line going to the cluster that gives it information about stuff, and it tells it where to go with that. And a lot of your Jeeps, like that 01 Jeep Cherokee that I've got, and whenever you can actually go in there if you got the scan tool on some of these, and you can tell the gauges to sweep and do all kinds of stuff because you're talking to a computer in there. Seatbelt warning devices are time delayed. What do you think about that? That's kind of an old thing, isn't it?
It gives you about 30 seconds before it starts bugging you to put the seatbelt on.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell you, although some of this little Ranger had a seatbelt warning device on it, it was under the seat on that particular one. And it was shorted internally, and whenever we had it over at Ford Place. When you drive that thing and it hit about 30 miles an hour, when that seatbelt light was supposed to come on, or 20 miles an hour, whatever it was, that seatbelt light was measuring vehicle speed, you know, the way it was wired up. And it was shorted, and when it went to turn on that seatbelt light and go ding, ding, ding at you, it would short out the speed signal and the speedometer would drop back to 0. So you'd hit about 20 miles an hour and then it'd drop back to 0. And that was a pain to figure out. But anyway, it was, because, you know, your books didn't talk about a lot about it. You just had to kind of work your way through it, you know.
How do they tell if there's nobody, if there's somebody or if there is nobody in the passenger seat?
It's got a sensor in that seat. I mean, whenever somebody's sitting in it. Matter of fact, used to there was just an open and close switch. Now I can tell how much they weigh. In my Taurus, in my F-150, or probably in your car, if you put some groceries over there and the seatbelt ain't buckled, it's going to turn off that passenger airbag because it thinks you got a little kid sitting over there. See what I mean? So I mean, it don't know what's sitting there, and they have for setting these things up and calibrating on them Jeeps. We have this thing that Donnie always called the butt, and it looks like somebody's fanny. I mean, it's a heavy piece of metal, and when you put it in there, it had the weight of like 100-pound woman or whatever, or man or whatever, and then you'd set it with your scan tool so that it was calibrated to that weight. See, and sometimes they'd have to be recalibrated. Then if you wanted to add some more weight, they had another weight you'd put on top of that. But that little transducer, see, whenever you weigh, it changes resistance and all that. And they all do that a slightly different way. But that is an airbag thing, is what it is. Because those airbags, did you guys see that Blind Side movie? All right. Remember that that black guy that movie was about? They said he scored something like 95% in protective instinct, percentile, and he was driving that truck that had an airbag on the passenger side. And when that airbag, somebody backed out in front of him, and he had a little kid in the truck with him, and that airbag came out of the dash whenever he hit that thing, and he was so fast that he stopped that airbag before it hit that kid. Whenever it came out of the dash, you know, but the fact about it, it would have killed that boy, and they did away with that. Used to they had it where you could turn it off, but people wouldn't do it. Either that or would keep it turned off, and so now they got it where if the seatbelt's not buckled and there's not, like if the seatbelt is buckled and there's no weight in the seat, it'll turn off the airbag on the passenger side. If the seatbelt's not buckled and it doesn't have enough weight in that seat, it'll turn it off too. So I mean, they're basically worried about, you know, somebody getting hurt by the airbag. Okay, let's see. An instrument voltage regulator is what? What is that on number 14? That's an A, basically. It's a load control device.
I think you skipped 13.
Huh?
You skipped 13.
Oh, a problem in the sending unit could cause a single gauge to malfunction. Is that a no-brainer or what? Duh. Okay, yeah.
Man, come on.
A problem in a sending unit can cause a single gauge to malfunction. Sure enough. I went yesterday to buy some pizza on the way home, and I handed the girl. She says $9.21, and I handed her $10. And how much change? That's right, isn't it? 79, right? She gets the calculator out to figure out how much change. But I went in and I said, let me give you this 21 cents. Not what you want to deal with that. Did she learn math in school? Never mind. You know, a lot of kids don't know math. You did good.
My little brother was spoiled from early age with a calculator.
Yeah, too much trouble.
To teach him how to reason, how to multiply and divide. In
Bad
9th
news,
grade.
man. Ooh. A potentiometer varies resistance by using what? Yeah, that's an old potentiometer, but it's the E is what it is there. A wrapped coil and a sliding contact. Yeah. I mean, that's a basic thing, but now they got resistive paint and all kinds of stuff, you know. When replacing the instrument voltage regulator, the technician must do what? This is number 16. That's A. Basically, it's the instrument cluster only. You know, I had to pull a battery out for that. The bulb in an automotive warning lamp is made of tinted glass. Is that true? Not really. That's actually, you know, look at that. That is a crazy question because it's worded like a true-false question, but it's written like a multiple choice. It's actually mounted behind a colored lens. We all know that. So that's going to be number B. A sending unit is usually, what is that? Especially if it's turning on a light, a sending unit for a light. Let's go so far as to say that. It's a grounding switch, right? Whenever you remember I told you about that, the older ones, the oil light would come on if it didn't have any pressure. And on those Fords I was talking about, when you do have pressure, it grounds the switch. When you don't have pressure, it grounds it on the old ones. You can see how changing that switch out, if you put the wrong one on there, would be a problem. When you turn on the key, you'd have oil pressure. When you crank it up, it'd go away. You know how that would be backwards if you did that wrong. In some vehicles, artificial or synthesized voices warn drivers of a condition that needs attention. That is nonsense. They don't have that anymore. And I'll tell you know why? Because everybody wanted that turned off because it really got on your nerves. I like that. Some people turn up that little volume control on that front end machine over there so they can listen to the voice coming out of that thing telling you what to do, you know. Turn that thing off so fast. I worked with this big old diagnostic machine that Sun made called an Interrogator. This thing was huge. It was like that big and that tall, and you hook it up to the car and do all this, and they had a speaker on there, and this guy would tell you with a voice what to do, you know, and just everybody wanted to turn that off. Turn it off. Turn it off. I get sick of hearing that guy. They tell you the same thing over and over again, and I guess in the German cars they would talk like, "Who's buckle up now?" You know, ways of making you talk. All right. So 19, if you wanted to get that one right, it's going to be A, but no, I don't think so. Digital recording about it. Technician A says an excess of water in a vehicle's fuel tank can cause a fuel gauge to give low readings. Is that true? I don't think so. And technician B says certain weather conditions may cause the fuel gauge to give it. And none of those are right. That's a bunch of hooey. Okay, let's move on down here. Technician A says a deformed fuel tank can cause a fuel gauge to operate erratically or stop functioning. What about it, guys? Can it? Well, yeah, because if it's bent and it's irritating, I mean, it is affecting the float, you see. You know, you got issues there. Technician B says a faulty fuel gauge sending unit can cause the gauge to operate erratically. Yeah, both those guys are right. All right, we're trying to get through this. Technician A says a faulty printed circuit board can cause a fuel gauge to give inaccurate readings, and it can. Technician B says faulty wiring or component failure within a fuel gauge circuit can cause that's not hard to figure out. One day, this guy, this rental car place over in Dothan that we did a lot of work on the rental cars. Had a lot of new Ford cars. This charging system wasn't working on this Ford Escort. That was a rental car they had, and so I got the car in there and I checked it out, and the first thing I noticed was that the alternator light didn't work. Alright, so I checked my fuses feeding the lights in there. You know, some of the other lights were working, the alternator light didn't work. So I got the instrument cluster out of there to see what was going on, and the instrument cluster was ripped. Now the charging system wasn't working because once again the power that goes through that warning light turns on the regulator on those, you know, the cars that have a standalone regulator. Okay, so that light, the fact that printed circuit was torn, you see, like if you take a bulb, you might notice that on your you got a bulb in there, and then jumping around your bulb in your charging system circuit, you'll have a resistor like that right there that's like, you know, 300 or 400 ohms. And so what happens is, if this blows, that path is still good, and you still end up with things feeding the alternator here. Okay. Hello? Hey. Well, we found out that it runs until it gets warm and then it cuts off. And so we're probably going to have a crank sensor problem. The spark is really crazy and erratic when it dies, and so you've got an ignition system failure, but we're trying to make sure that we don't sell you nothing you don't need. And so we're probably going to do an oscilloscope test on the crank sensor and all that. No, well, just doing the testing will cost you, but you know, the basic charge thing. But what we're going to do is we're going to find out what it is before we throw something at it. And it very well could be that ignition module, but I don't think it's going to cost all that much. You know, you shouldn't have to mortgage too much in order to pay for that. So, but I'll keep you posted. We need to do a work order on that thing too. I guess. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. George, find out where the crank sensor is and what color the wire is that feeds it on that 89.
The oil filter doesn't fit on that truck.
Is it the wrong oil filter? Did Brett send you the wrong oil filter for that truck? Fiddlestick. Okay. All right, let's go right here. While I've talked to Brett, we're going to go here. Technician A says, okay, number 22 is right. Fuel gauge doesn't read. Michael, let me talk to Brett. Alright, whenever technician A says if the fuel gauge does not read empty when the fuel tank is known to be empty, the cap on the fuel tank may not be tightened down securely. Not really. Technician B says if the fuel gauge does not read empty when the tank is known to be empty, a vacuum may have formed within the tank. Good grief. Neither one of those guys are right. Okay, technician A says if the fuel gauge, technician A says if the brake warning light comes on when the ignition key is in the on position and the parking brake's released, the brake system may be leaking fluid. Well, you know when you go to start it proves out, right? Technician B says if the brake warning light fails to come on when the parking brakes are applied and the ignition made on position, the warning light bulb may be burned out. Yeah, that's a C. And then finally the last one is D. Technician A says if a slow-acting instrument voltage regulator causes rapid vibration of the needle gauge, the regulator should be adjusted. Right, Nick, wrong. Should replace it. Technician B says if all the gauges fail to function, the individual gauge needle should be checked first. Now this test right here, I'm going to revamp this test next time I teach this class because a lot of this is talking about, there's way too much in that test about bimetal gauges, which is dumb. You know, there aren't hardly any bimetal gauges anymore. And so anyway, now then, y'all keep on punching through.
Neither?
Huh?
Is that neither?
What is it?
25.
25 is, yeah, it's a neither, yeah. It's a neither on that one. All right, now you guys